Good evening, dear listener, and welcome to another episode of FREDtime Stories. On this show, I will be reading short horror stories from both up-and-coming authors and horror legends. In case you didn't know, I am your host, Dead Fred. I am also the voice of the horror-inspired rock band Mortica. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to this channel and leaving a like and a comment. Turn on the bell notification so you never miss an episode. If you want to know more about Mortica, please follow us on our social media accounts. The links are in the description. If you want to support the show and the band, please consider joining our Patreon page. For just $5 a month, you can have access to behind the screams footage and early access to merchandise and music. And now, without further ado, let's get into tonight's reading. Tonight's reading comes to us from horror legend H.P. Lovecraft. Tonight, we'll be listening to The Statement of Randolph Carter. I repeat to you, gentlemen, that your inquisition is fruitless. Detain me here forever if you will. Confine or execute me if you must. Everything that I can remember I have told you in perfect candor. Nothing has been distorted or concealed, and if anything remains vague, it is only because a dark cloud which has come over my mind. That cloud and the nebulous nature of the horrors which brought it upon me. Again I say, I do not know what became of Harley Warren, though I think, almost hope, that he is in a peaceful oblivion, if there were ever such a blessed thing. It is true that I have for 5 years been his closest friend, with a partial sharer of the terrible researchers into the unknown. I will not deny, though my memory is uncertain and indistinct, that this witness of yours may have seen us together, as he says, on the Gainesville Pike, walking toward Big Cypress Swamp at 11:30 on that awful night. That we bore electric lanterns, spades, and a curious coil of wire with attached instruments. I will even affirm for those things all played a part in the single hideous scene that remains burned into my shaken recollection. But of what followed, and of the reason I was found alone and dazed on the edge of the swamp next morning, I must insist that I know nothing save for what I have already told you over and over and over again. You say to me that there is nothing in the swamp or near it in which could form the setting of the frightful episode. I reply that I know nothing beyond what I saw. Vision or nightmare it may have been. Vision or nightmare I fervently hope it was. Yet it is all my mind retains of what took place on the shocking hours after we left the sight of men. And why Harley Warren did not return, he or his shade or some nameless thing I cannot describe, alone can tell. As I've said before, the weird studies of Harley Warren were well known to me, and to some extent shared by me. Of his vast collection of strange, rare books on forbidden subjects, I have read that are all written in languages that I am master. But these are few as compared to those in languages I cannot understand. Most, I believe, are in Arabic, and the fiend-inspired book which brought upon the end, the book he carried in his pocket out of the world, was written in characters whose like I've never seen elsewhere. Warren would never tell me what was in that book. As to the nature of his studies, must I say again, I no longer retain full comprehension. It seems to me rather merciful that I do not, for they are terrible studies which I pursued through more reluctant fascination than actual inclination. Warren always dominated me, and seems I feared him. I remember how I shuddered at the facial expression on the night before the awful happening, when he talked so incessantly of the theory of why certain corpses never decay, but rest firm and fat in their tombs for thousands of years. But I do not fear him now, for I suspect that he has known horrors beyond my ken. Now I fear for him. Once I said that I have no clear idea of our object that night. Certainly had much to do with something in the book which Warren carried with him, that ancient book in undecipherable characters which came to him from India the month before. But I swear I do not know what it was that we were expecting to find. Your witness says he saw us at 11:30 on the Gainesville Pike, heading for Big Cypress Swamp. This is probably true, but I have no distinct memory of it. The picture seared into my soul is of one scene only, and the hour must have been long after midnight, for a waning crescent moon was high in the vaporous heavens. The place was an ancient cemetery, so ancient that I trembled at the manifold signs of immemorial years. It was in a deep, damp hollow, overgrown with rank grass, moss, and curious creeping weeds, and filled with a vague stench which my idle fancy associated absurdly with rotting stone. On every hand there were signs of neglect and decrepitude, and I seemed haunted by the notion that Warren and I were the first living creatures to invade the lethal silence of centuries. Over the valley's rim, a wan, waning crescent moon peered through the noisome vapors that seemed to emanate from unheard catacombs, and by its feeble, wavering beams I could distinguish a repellent array of antique slabs, urns, cenotaphs, and mausoleum facades, all crumbling, moss-grown, and moisture-stained, and partly concealed by the grass. My first vivid impression of my own presence in this terrible, half-obliterated sepulchre, and of throwing down some burdens which seemed to have had me carrying, I now observed that I had with me an electric lantern and 2 spades, whilst my companion was supplied with a similar lantern and a portable telephone outfit. No word was uttered, for the spot and the task seemed known to us, and without delay we seized our spades and commenced to clear away the grass, weeds, and drifted earth from that flat, archaic mortuary. After uncovering the entire surface, which consisted of 3 immense granite slabs, we stepped back some distance to survey the carnal scene, and Warren appeared to make some mental calculations. Then he returned to the sepulchre. Using his spade as a lever, sought to pry up the slab nearest a stony ruin which may have been a monument back in its day. He did not succeed, and motioned for me to come to his assistance. Finally, our combined strength loosened the stone, and we raised and tipped it to one side. The removal of the slab revealed a black aperture from which rushed an effluent of miasmic gases so nauseous that we started back in horror. After an interval, however, we approached the pit again, and found the exhalations less unbearable. Our lanterns disclosed the top of the flight of stone steps, dripping with some detestable ichor from the inner earth, and bordered the moist walls encrusted with niter. Now, for a time my memory records verbal discourse. Warren addressed me at length in his mellow tenor voice, a voice singularly unperturbed by the awesome surroundings. "I'm sorry to have to ask you to stay behind on the surface," he said, "but it would be a crime to let any one of your frail nerves go down there. You can't imagine, even from what you've read and even from what I've told you, the things I shall have to see and do. It's fiendish work, Carter, and I doubt any man with ironclad sensibilities would see it through and come out alive and sane. I don't wish to offend you, and heaven knows I'd be glad enough to have you with me, but the responsibility is to a certain sense of mine, and I couldn't drag a bundle of nerves like you down there to probable death or madness. I tell you, you can't imagine what the thing really is like, but I promise to keep you informed over the telephone for every move. You see, I have enough wire to reach the center of the earth and back." I can still hear, in memory, those coolly spoken words. I seemed desperately anxious to accompany my friend into the sepulchred depths, yet he proved inflexibly obdurate. At one time, he threatened to abandon the expedition if I remained insistent, a threat which proved effective since he alone held the key to the thing. All this I can still remember, although I no longer know what manner of thing we sought. After he had secured my reluctant acquaintance in his design, Warren picked up the reel of wire and adjusted the instrument. At his nod, I took one of the latter and sealed myself up to an aged, discolored gravestone close to the newly uncovered aperture. Then he shook my hand, shouldered the coil of wire, and disappeared within the interminable obscury. For a moment I kept sight of the glow of his lantern and heard the rustle of wire as he laid down before him. But the glow soon disappeared abruptly, as if a turn in the stone staircase had been encountered, and the sound died away almost as quickly. I was alone, yet bound to the unknown depths by the magic strands which insulated surface lay green beneath the struggling beams of the waning crescent moon. In the lone silence of that hoary and deserted city of the dead, my mind conceived most ghastly fantasies and delusions, and the grotesque shrines and monoliths seemed to assume a hideous personality, a half-sentience. Amorphous shadows seemed to lurk in the darker recesses of the weed-choked hollow, and to flit in some blasphemous ceremonial process past the portals of the modulating tombs in pallid, peering crescent moon. I constantly consulted with my watch by the light of my electric lantern and listened to the feverish anxiety of the receiver of the telephone. But for more than a quarter of an hour I heard nothing. Then a faint clicking came from the instrument, and I called down to my friend in an tense voice. Apprehensive as I was nevertheless unprepared for the words which came up, that uncanny vault in accents more alarming and quivering than I had heard before from Harley Warren. He who had left so calmly a little while previous now called from below in a shaky, whispered voice, "God, if you could see what I'm seeing." I could not answer. Speechless, I could only wait. Then came the frenzied tones again. "Carter, it's terrible. Unbelievable." This time my voice did not fail me, and I poured into the transmitter a flood of excited questions. Terrified, I continued to repeat, "Warren, what is it? What is it?" Once more came the voice of my friend, still hoarse from fear, and now apparently tinged with despair. "I can't tell you, Carter. It is too utterly beyond thought. I dare not tell you. No man could know it and live, great God. I never dreamed of this." Stillness again, save for the now incoherent torrent of my shuddering inquiry. Then the voice of Warren in a pitch of wider concentration. "Carter, for the love of God, put back the slab and get out as quick as you can. Leave everything else and make for the outside. This is your only chance. Do as I say, and don't ask me to explain." I heard, and yet was only able to repeat my frantic questions. Around me were the tombs and the darkness and the shadows. Below me, some peril beyond the radius of human imagination. But my friend was in greater danger than I, and though my fear, I felt vague resentment that I should deem capable of deserting him underneath the circumstances. More clicking, and after a pause, a piteous cry from Warren. "Beat it! For God's sakes, pull back the slab and beat it!" Something in the boyish slang of my evidently stricken companion unleashed my faculties. I formed and shouted a resolute, "Warren, brace up, I'm coming down." But at this offer the tone of my auditor changed to a scream of utter despair. "Don't! You can't understand, it's too late. And my own fault. Put back the slab and run!" There's nothing else you or anyone can do. The tone changed again, this time acquiring a softer quality, as of hopeless resignation, yet it remained tense through anxiety for me. Quick, before it's too late. I tried not to heed him, tried to break through the paralysis which held me, and to fulfill my vow to rush down to his aid. But his next whisper found me still held inert in the chains of horror. Carter, hurry. It's no use. You must go. Better one than two. The slab. A pause, more clicking, then the faint voice of Warren. Nearly over now. Don't make it harder. Cover up those damn steps and run for your life. You're losing time. So long, Carter. Won't see you again. After that, silence. I know not how many interminable eons I sat stupefied, whispering, muttering, calling. Those eons I whispered and muttered, called, shouted, and screamed, Warren! Warren, answer me, are you there? And then it came to me, a crowning horror of all. Unbelievable, unthinkable, almost unmentionable thing. I have said that eons seemed to elapse after Warren shrieked forth his last despairing warning. And the only one of my own cries now broke the hideous silence. And after a while there was a further clicking on the receiver, and I strained my ears to listen. Again I called down, Warren, are you there? And in answer heard the thing which has brought the cloud over my mind. I do not, gentlemen, account for this thing, that voice, nor can I venture to describe it in detail, since the first words took away my consciousness and created a mental blank which reached the time of my awakening in the hospital. Shall I say that the voice was deep, hollow, gelatinous, remote, unearthly, inhuman, disembodied? What shall I say? It was the end of my experience and the end of my story. I heard it and knew no more. Heard it as I sat petrified in that unknown cemetery in the hollow, amidst the crumbling stones and the falling tombs, the rank vegetation and the miasmal vapors. Heard it well from the innermost depths of the damnable open sepulchre when I watched, amorphous, shadows beneath danced the accursed waning moon. It said,
You fool. Warren is dead.
I hope you have enjoyed tonight's reading, and hope you will stop by again. My name has been Dead Fred. Until next time, dear mortal, stay scared.